Clinical trials are the backbone of medical progress, but they've become increasingly complex, costly, and slow. Can technology smooth the process without compromising rigor? Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm HealthBiz Group and host of the HealthBiz podcast, where I interview top healthcare leaders about their lives and careers. My guest today is Scott Chetham, CEO of Faro Health and a former clinical operations leader at Google's Verily. Scott saw firsthand how inefficient and burdensome today's trials have become, and he decided to do something about it. Do you like this show? If so, please subscribe and leave a review. Scott, welcome to the HealthBiz podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
I wonder, how did you first get involved in healthcare and in clinical research in particular?
It goes back to when I was in university in Australia. While I was training, I worked as a coordinator enrolling patients in clinical trials. Then I actually went on during my postgraduate study, actually ended up working in a cath lab, training electrophysiologists, and I started enrolling my own patients in clinical trials. Actually have been around long enough that I was the assistant for the second dual chamber implantable converter defibrillator in the world by Medtronic. And because one of the beauties of being from Brisbane, Australia is I worked at a tertiary referral center and we had a captured population. So we had zero attrition. We couldn't lose patients in a clinical trial because you couldn't go anywhere else in the entire state. So obviously, like a lot of the big sponsor companies who do this type of research used to love coming to us because of our, the engagement from patients, and you just frankly couldn't go anywhere. So we were a very captured population. And that's kind of how I got into the industry. It was more of the nature of where I was doing my postgraduate study at St. Andrew's Hospital and kind of my placement there and training. So it was fun. And one day, a couple of my bosses pulled me aside, the director of cardiology, and said, "Scott, if you do this job, you're going to be doing the same thing again and again. You like research, you should do that," as a helping hand to guide me. And that's kind of what steered me in this direction.
It's always helpful if you've got someone like that, and because it probably would have been easier for him to say, "Oh, I got this guy. He's like a robot. Let's just keep going," and not tell him about the big bad world out there. I mean, I've been involved in some clinical trials in Australia. It's an interesting place for that because, as you said, first of all, I mean, each state is also pretty large. They're not going anywhere, and also the costs aren't too high. And from a regulatory standpoint, it's kind of easy to get started sometimes, which is good for companies that are just getting their funding and need to get some evidence in place. So I always enjoyed it.
Yeah, it tends to even today be a place you go for your first in human research, because the regulatory barrier, while not lower, is just more efficient.
Yeah.
Having said that, market access to getting payment is terrible.
Yeah.
So choose your poison.
Yeah,
what you want.
Fair enough. Exactly. Well, you'll get to your trial, you'll, sort of saying, where can I do it? Like you said, it's not lower standards, it's just more efficient. But then you certainly don't want to be making a living there long-term, at least in the drug business. So then you were at Verily, and I'm wondering what you learned there about clinical trials and, structural issues with the trials.
Yeah. So, Verily supports, and at the time I was there, a number of the very public partnerships with some of the largest sponsor or pharma companies on the planet. And they were offering various services for decentralization. Like, how do we help enroll patients more efficiently? How do we collect data more efficiently when they're not on site? They had a huge baseline study enrolling 10,000 participants over several years, measuring a lot of things, mental health. But the problem is you still inherit what I would say just poorly designed protocols. And the reason is as I reflect even the clinical trials for the pandemic, those protocols and what happens to participants, so like what happens day to day and what we're going to measure, is designed in a table in Microsoft Word. And there's no information about what worked before, because what we tend to do, or the state of the art before we came about, is you open what someone did before, or you look at what someone did before, copy and paste, and then you evolve it. And you inherit all the mistakes and all the problems from that. And the biggest sin in some regards is the fact that we redline things in Microsoft Word and then we clean it up and we check it into a system for regulations and we promptly forget everything we ever learned. And some ways you think working for someone like Verily is because we supported so many large sponsors. You kind of think, well, maybe they're better than me or they do it a different way. And when I realized we're all doing it the same way. And so I was like, well, we have to fix that. And because if we can't fix that, it doesn't matter how much more efficient we get in any single point solution. We kind of have to fix our design. And then we've got the opportunity to start doing what I think some really exciting things coming now, which is the ability to automate all the connections to the point systems. And I think, and which will really allow, in some ways, we do a lot in my field of busy work. And I think it'll really allow us to spend time on the strategic part of our roles versus, frankly, just creating document after document after document, and then taking that information, resynthesizing it, and then handing it to someone else. I mean, I think getting out of that part of the job is going to be a thing that can really help a lot.
You partly answered this question, I think, in your previous reply, but I noticed that clinical trials have become quite cumbersome over time, and I would say even especially so in some areas that are particularly critical, like rare disease or immuno-oncology, where the patients have tremendous need, and there's also great opportunities for breakthrough. Why? I mean, first, am I right that trials have become more cumbersome, and why would that be?
It's a couple of reasons. One is the science has gotten more complicated. And so because the science is more complicated, we have to collect more things. As we've moved to rare disease, we have to now spend more time helping, I would say, identify the right responders in a rare disease, which means more testing, more identification. Then because of genomics and pharmacogenomics, we have more testing on there to understand how is a drug interacting. And so science has driven this explosion in, I would say, the amount of procedures or activities we do on patients. And I'm choosing my term there correctly. We do them to people. We don't do them with people. Unfortunately, we do these things to people. And that complexity or data collection is just directly proportional to our success rate. It's been studied quite extensively, but unfortunately, the biggest predictor of trial success is actually how much data you're collecting. It's not the science, and it's petrifying fact. And so it's a true effect. We are just doing more stuff. And the reason it's so overwhelming is because we do everything by hand. This is one of the last industries, I think, out there that, it's ripe to be automated. It's just because, because of the nature of the industry and the quality bar, we've had to do everything by hand. But now I think technology is finally at a point where that's pivoting and changing.
So I'm just going to ask you this because this maybe as a devil's advocate, because there's quite a few companies that have made, good inroads and good money in things like electronic data capture and, other kind of technologies, and people applying supposedly AI to clinical trial design, and having different tools that are used for, clinical trial management. And there's just the whole ecosystem of that kind of e-trial business. So what is it that, first of all, maybe a two-part question, is it really fair to say that it's sort of, done by hand today? That's the starting point. And then what makes your approach different from others that may be purporting to bring some technology to bear here?
Okay, no, great couple of questions. So I'll refine my statement. We have excellent point solutions. Excellent point solutions. We have many. We have them in recruiting. We have electronic data capture systems. We have clinical trial management systems. We have a budget system. We have payment systems. They're all individual point solutions. So what I say is done by hand is I design a protocol. I have a written protocol, but then I have to take it to between 20 and 60 vendors. I send them a PDF, and they have to take that, scrape out what they think I meant to program these individual point solutions. And that's what I mean when it's done by hand. Because data and design concepts just simply don't, like other fields where you have APIs and you can just hit a button and you can connect things like for payments, and that world doesn't exist yet. It's very much coming, and it's coming very, very fast. But that's the stuff that's done by hand, and that's where there's a lot of inefficiencies. And also because of this disparate nature of the point solutions, it's not a learning system where we can take all this information back on those implementations and fold it back into the design, what worked, what didn't. And that's kind of what I mean by hand. Like if I'm designing a clinical trial, if I want to know what it'll cost today, I have to hand it to a colleague who will then do kind of identify all the things in this trial, the data I'm going to collect, when I'm going to collect it, and they'll put together a site budget. It takes about 4 days for a place to do it. That's what I mean by my. I think the head of CDISC, so the big like standards agency for coding, said at a recent conference, on average, a protocol is transcribed about 50 times and mostly incorrectly. And so it's a sad fact of the reality. I think I think it's the second part of the question is like what does Fire do differently here?
That's right.
Okay, so you can think of us a couple of ways, but the simplest way is rather than a static PDF representation of a trial, I would say what we are is a digital representation of a trial. And what I mean by that is not just, okay, I have a series of columns with a field in it. What I mean is that we have a deeply connected AI system of knowledge graphs so that I know if I'm collecting, let's say, a chemistry panel, it's almost in every clinical trial. I know that, okay, there's many types of chemistry panels, and that causes a whole heap of confusion a lot of the time in trial in protocols. But we know that is, let's say it was a Chem 20. We know all the analytes. We know all the units of measure. We know the LOINC code to tell your lab vendor how to do it. We know the data packet that you'd need to send that this data would have to be transmitted in. Because we also know the CPT code, we can tell you that what this will cost instantly as you start designing a trial. So we also know the SNOMED code. So if you wanted to directly extract data, we also have all the CDIS representations so you can automatically program an EDC system instead of spending 6 weeks doing it. So what's different is while our system looks like Word, as you're typing, it's intelligent enough to do the reconciliation and everything under the hood that all these processes are being built out for you that can later go on and be automated. And that's what I mean by digital trial. But what gets really exciting is because you have all of this data, you can use now AI agents to better inform design and say, okay, your patient visit times throughout the trial look like this. And we've actually digitized the entire corpus of public domain information and performance for all trials into this system now. So we can tell you, oh, if you have a visit time of this and these activities, it will lead to this amendment. And by the way, your enrollment rates look like this. And so it directly feeds back to the teams while they're designing this thing, what this means for a patient, what it means for a site, who would you need to do it, what it will cost up front. So you don't have to wait for all of these things. You're getting all this information. And I think the world of, it won't be us who solves this automation problem entirely, but there's a world coming where basically I can hit a button and a system will be programmed. It's public. We're partnered with Viva to auto-program their EDC system in a fraction of the time that like today is best practice, 4 to 6 weeks. Do it in a day. And there's that possibility now across the entire ecosystem. We can't obviously do all of that, but what we can do is empower other vendors to use our information and provide it to them so that they can reduce the time and improve the quality, because instead of humans transcribing things, reading it, interpreting it, transcribing it, a machine can frankly do a better job of just directly pushing this was the intent.
Got it. So, a lot of what you talked about up front was how you've got these Word documents, people do the redlining, and then you lose out on whatever had been learned along the way. And that is sort of assuming that you've got to trial design and then it continues all the way through. Another issue, which I heard you touch on a little bit because you used the word amendment, is that once a trial gets started, often there's amendments. And then that is very difficult with the protocol for whoever is implementing it at the trial sites to actually be able to deal with that. And that is a huge problem, at least in my experience. Do you deal with that issue as well, of amendments?
We deal with a part of it. I mean, I'll break it up. This is not my stat, but about 50% of amendments are preventable. we can help on that side of things because amendments fix problems. The other 50% is just net new stuff you got to fix. They fix problems. So I think getting that to zero is frankly never going to happen. Um, but the avoidable ones, we can help with, quite a bit. As I said, we absorbed all the corpus of information and all the reasons for amendments. So some of the things coming from us shortly is if you said you had an inclusion criteria that this person needs some sort of biomarker value of X, what we can tell you is if X in a similar therapeutic area or indication has ever changed in an amendment, we can tell you up front and link you to any protocol in history that's had that change. And then you'll have to make a decision because it may or may not be relevant to you. And I think this is where I think AI in some ways shines. It's that workflow modeling that it can tell you things that you can't easily find yourself. It won't tell you what to do, but just the act of that research would take me, formerly in a role, it would take me weeks to do some of this. Doesn't mean we'll make the right decision.
Yeah.
That's a different
But
issue.
it's good. But I think what it also highlights, though, is the role of AI in terms of what it will replace. Like if you are a senior analyst or clinical trial practitioner, if you had that information, you can apply your judgment to it. A lot of the times, the problem is you don't really have that information. It's anecdotal. You remember John over here worked on this other trial where they did this, that, or the other. You remember reading about something or hearing about it at a conference. Maybe you did it. And this gives you a more systematic approach.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where the technology really is right now, at least in this space, is the ability to surface information from huge amounts of scale that is out there and bring it in. The other thing it can do is with agentic AI, it can frankly just automate repetitive things very well in reviews and things like, okay, in stuff people miss, like we call them maybe playbooks that, okay, if you have a data retention standard you add a country to a trial and an amendment, but the data retention standard in that country is like 22 days versus 5 in the US. It can point things out to you as soon as you do it. So it can do stuff like that relatively well. I don't think we're at the world yet where, we give a lot of design suggestions with, literature to back it up, but it's not at a point where you would go, all right, I'm instantly going to do this, what it recommends. It will surface things that you may not be aware of, but human judgment's not going away. Humans have to have ultimate say here. Also AI doesn't always have all the context.
No, it doesn't. So we've been speaking a lot at kind of the systemic level here about, the issue with design and how, all the pieces need to be knit together and so on and so forth. Can you bring it down to the level of maybe a specific trial to the extent that you can talk about that? What is, kind of different or accelerated thanks to your involvement, and to the extent that you can share something specific, that would be, I think, helpful.
Yeah, I can give a couple of really specific examples, everything to enterprise down to a small couple of startups we work with without mentioning names. So what was really interesting is we had a customer with pediatric rare disease. And what was really interesting, one of the outputs we can give is like, well, it sounds simple, but here's the amount of blood you're going to have to draw every day. And actually also, here is the visit times because of PKs, pharmacokinetic sampling. You have to deliver a drug. And in pediatrics from 2 to like 12-year-olds. And what's really came out apparent when they looked at it, because the team hadn't thought about it, is patients would, I should say, our pediatric patients would have had to sit there, or a 2-year-old, for 3 consecutive days for 14 hours in a hospital, or I should say a trial site for this. And the amount of blood they were drawing was way over the limit to do the PK analysis. They caught that up front, and what ended up happening, and I was excited, like I learned all this, secondhand, is they actually took the analytics to the FDA and had a discussion. Like this trial will never be enrolled, bluntly. Like it's just not possible, and they had to because it's an approved drug in adults, so it has to be studied for peds. And the FDA actually granted them a novel design where they ended up randomizing the pediatric patients so no patient ever had to experience more than 1 PK day. And that's how they solved it. And it was a really nice negotiation with the FDA where they actually saw it and visually and was like, oh, okay, we get it now. we agree you can do something a bit novel here to make sure this actually happens and ends up being, hopefully gets approved. I don't know that trial is enrolling now, but that would have never been, that would have turned into a mess if they'd gone forward. And a couple of others are more around, I would say, um, for enterprise is really cost efficiency. And we have, this is part, I mean, we have a public paper with Merck, where the savings is over, a bit over 100 million, through basically, I would say, improvement of design from a patient-centric approach. What I love about Merck, they never told anyone, go save money. What they told their teams is let's focus on the patient experience. Let's focus on what the data is telling us about how long the visits are, how burdensome it is, and the site. What can we do to make this trial more efficient? It turns out when you do that exercise, you end up saving money, because a large chunk of it is, do we really need this today? Do I really need to answer this question at phase 2A? Do I really need to answer this at this? So it leads to, a lot of this data just leads to a more, I would say, enables better discussions among the team to drive decisions. And I think it's because I'm, like yourself, you may have been on this side when I've sat on the sponsor side myself, on trials, is you have this fear that I can't go back and collect this again. And without data pulling in the other direction, this is what it means for the patient and the site. You tend to fall on the side of fear and, well, I'll just collect everything.
Yeah, let me get it. I might need it.
Because I'm there. Yeah, because I might need it.
Yeah.
And so I think it really just helps teams sort of these analytics. And what I've seen is that teams generally will more than 90% of teams, and we've done this enough now, I'm pretty confident seems to be this about the number, will, when they see data, will change. There's a small number of teams that I want it and I'm going to collect it and I'm going to do it no matter what. That exists, unfortunately, but it's the minority. I think most people in this industry to like help people.
So in a way, you've anticipated my next question as well in your answer here, which is really about the alignment with regulators and sponsors on the shift toward digital transformation. And you give me a great example of FDA realizing, hey, they may dictate certain things, but the result is going to be, no trial that's done, and they're willing to change that, especially if they don't see a risk and they see another way to do it. And on the sponsor side, at least a more enlightened one like Merck seems to do it for the right reasons, and then it ends up having a financial return on investment. I can imagine. Well, first of all, maybe there's more examples of people all pulling in that direction. But what are some of the tensions? Because to go back to something you said before about a lot of busy work, that busy work is some fairly well-paid people's job that they're fairly happy with and have been doing for some time and don't have a huge desire to change. Not everyone's like you and wants to stop doing something boring to do something crazy.
Yeah, I think I'll tackle the FDA one first. I think there's definitely a move, and we've seen this. The FDA is very much into digitization of protocols so that they can take a digital form and then do something with it. In fact, they're part of, I know they have an internal initiative on this, details, but they're definitely aligning with, I would say, automation of the analysis on their side. I think what is less transparent on the FDA, and I think they could help the industry a lot here, and it's in two ways. One is the FDA still remains to be silent sometimes if you go to FDA review meetings. If you kind of have standard of care in your protocol, and I'm going to collect this physical exam and this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing, they'll never tell you if they've seen another sponsor that is collecting less data and is is much more patient friendly. They'll never say anything in my experience. They'll kind of just let it go. And I think the FDA could go further along clarifying for safety and standard of care what their real stance is. Because otherwise you can end up with, I'm not going to say the name, there's one of the most studied drugs in history that still has a full chemistry panel measured in every trial it is. And because it's so successful, it's often used as I would say, as a first-line therapy, and a second drug is added in. But it now has decades of chemistry panels in hundreds and hundreds of trials. What? Like, why are we doing this? Like, there's a lot of things I think the FDA could do again, and I think they are moving in this direction, by the way, is to really, I think, help sponsors along by collecting less relevant information, which would help them not having to spend so much time analyzing huge corpuses of information. So they could go a little bit further there. I also, and this is my personal rant, and you probably experienced this, 21 CFR Part 11, if people know that it's e-signature, should be updated. Just for everyone's reference, it's a very one-page, very short piece of regulation that describes the audit trail required for electronically sourced and signed data. It hasn't been updated now in it's more than a decade.
I was going to say.
And it does limit EHR, the use of like EHR systems in like for a primary endpoint in a like phase 3 study. You'd have to be very careful because you need validated EHR systems. So I think one tactical thing the FDA could do very quickly is update some of these regulations for the way they want data to be used more at scale, because that does directly affect a lot of what gets done.
Can we talk about international harmonization as well? We were involved in some related to HIV and other antivirals, and there were sometimes contradictions between FDA and European regulators. And you'd go to one, they'd say one thing, the other, and we actually kind of brought them together. What's happening with harmonization these days, and is that a big factor in what you see?
It's better, but it's not great. I'll give a real example. And it happened recently. So there's the FDA's clarified its stance in oncology. Like they rejected a drug from a sponsor. I think it was yesterday or the day before because of not enough US patient data. But as you said, for European payers and regulators, there's a difference in some of the like EPROs, like surveys that are actually approved in each jurisdiction, which means because of that, you have to reuse country data between them. I have to collect the same information 2-3 different ways for different regulators. And some of these EPROs are burdensome.
Yeah, and the EPROs, electronic patient reported outcomes.
Yeah, and even some of the ones for clinician reported outcomes, because there's different acceptance. This is a problem because it's not good for patients. It's not good for sponsors because it wastes time and money. It would be nice if our regulators, the EMA and the FDA, and a couple of the others, actually just agreed to more standard things, because this is indirectly hurting everybody. So I think it's nice that the regulations themselves are very much harmonized, but the secondary layer on top is like, what is the data required? That's not harmonized very well. And so I think there's some work. There's definitely some work to be done there, I think, on of the regulators between each other. Because I mean, all this design, so we just see like, why are there so many ePros? And that's the reason. Yeah.
Got it. All right. Well, we could go on. I have other questions. So I'm just going to ask you a final question that I ask everybody, which is whether you have a book that you might recommend for our audience. And then if not, or in addition, if you have some book we recommend to avoid.
Okay. No, it's a great question. And the book I'm going to recommend is The Jolt Effect, and it's recent. And the reason is like, I've come into this field from a background in clinical development. Like if you'd asked me 20 years ago, like, would I be the CEO of a software company? I would have laughed. But it also means I don't come from a background of sales and what I would say like sales development and commercial development. And so I think, the Jolt Effect is much more along those lines of like how to sell well. And I think for those of us who don't come from a business background, I think it's really helpful. So yeah, that's my take. It's one of the more useful things I've read lately.
Great. Excellent. Well, that's it for yet another episode of the HealthBiz podcast. I'm David Williams, president of Health Business Group. My guest today has been Scott Chetham, CEO of Faro Health. If you like this show, I hope you will subscribe and leave a review. Meanwhile, Scott, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.